If I asked you to picture a typical movie villain, I'm sure the first thing to pop into your head would be the classic children's movie villain archetypes. Dark colors, evil laugh, huge ego, small brains. You know how studios like them. When it comes to writing good, complex villains though, distinguishing a crudely written villain from a masterfully written one is usually an easy task. As long as we're not asking why the villain's a villain in the first place. Man, what'd they do to you, Chris Pine? The writers are at least doing the bare minimum for the job. But what separates a good villain from a great one? Well, it's usually the same technique that gives any character in a movie more depth. Good character development. Now that might seem obvious to you, but this is not the end of the story when it comes to utterly terrifying villains that we've seen on screen. It's the combination of a strong origin story with even stronger character convictions that can turn even the most simple villain concepts into truly evil creations. One of the best villains to represent this deadly combination of ironclad conviction and the lack of common morality is Terrence Fletcher from Whiplash. Played by J.K. Simmons, Fletcher is a music teacher at the famous Schaefer Conservatory, where the main character Andrew Neiman hopes to become the best drummer in the world. Fletcher is shown to be unconscionably manipulative towards his band members, verbally and psychologically abusing his students with the hope of creating the next music legend. He believes that only a musician who can overcome overwhelming adversity, one who will never become discouraged enough to give up, no matter what they have to sacrifice, has the chance to be great. Now to be fair, if I had this guy screaming at me while I was drumming, I would definitely improve real fast because I'd be fearing for my literal life. But there's a fine line between strict and psychopathic. And I don't know what they put in J.K. Simmons' cereal for this movie, but whatever they did, worked. I've never been more terrified of the guy, and he is literally Omni-Man. Now Fletcher on paper might seem like a cut and dry villain of the film, but there's a method to his madness. From the very beginning, we see him toying with Andrew psychologically, mocking his double time swing and the infamous "not quite my tempo" scene.
Not quite my tempo.
Where he slaps Andrew repeatedly while asking him if he's rushing or dragging. This is all done so Fletcher can break the musicians down and see if they have what it takes to rise back up and practice even harder to achieve perfection. In his eyes, he's not being an asshole for no reason. He manipulates them in a way that makes them think they are worthless, even if they're pretty good, so they don't ever become complacent and continue to push themselves as hard as they possibly can. We see this in action several times, like when Andrew goes to practice over and over again, even when he starts bleeding from his hands. In the grueling drumming gauntlet Fletcher puts the 3 potential core drum members in to ascertain who will be playing on stage for their performance that week, the drummers are stuck for hours trying to hit the right tempo that Fletcher wants, blood pouring from each of their fingers onto the kit. Eventually, on Andrew's last attempt, Fletcher starts going ham on him, hitting cowbells and throwing sheet books at his head while he's drumming, just to test to see how focused Andrew can be with all the chaos and yelling going on. This is Fletcher's version of earning the part, someone who will shed blood, sweat, and tears to get through their music, no matter what else is going on in their life. All of this brings up an important question almost directly to us, the viewer. Does Fletcher have a point in pushing the members of his band as hard as he does to try and produce the next music icon like Buddy Rich or Charlie Parker? Can a great musician ever be born without these extreme methods, bordering on insanity? This moral ambiguity is the center of the themes that plague the entire movie, and is the principle that drives Fletcher forward. Unsurprisingly, there are 2 sides to this coin. On one hand, an example of Fletcher going too far is with Sean Casey, a musician who previously studied under Fletcher and made it to first seat in the prestigious Lincoln Symphony. Sean gets into a car crash, however it's all but confirmed that he did this on purpose rather than on accident due to the immense pressure and anxiety that started when he became Fletcher's student. This is just one known example of the terrible effects Fletcher's teaching methods had on his students, not to mention the toll we see on Andrew directly with his relationship and his family. The chilling thing is that when Fletcher finds out about Sean, he's emotionally heartbroken over the news, but not for the reason we would all expect. No, he's sad entirely because the world lost a great musician, not because he cared about the boy personally at all. He sees it like a loss of an investment, something he took in as a piece of coal and pressed until it turned into a diamond. It showed that he's not completely void of empathy, but he simply had his sights on something completely different than a good, nurturing teacher would, who cares about their students as people and not just what they can accomplish. This obviously takes a 180 turn from positive teacher figures in other movies like John Keating from Dead Poet Society or Ken Carter from Coach Carter. After Andrew himself crashes a car on the way to an important concert and attacks Fletcher on stage after he can't play due to an injury to his left hand, he's kicked out of Schaefer Conservatory. A bit later, he's asked to testify against Fletcher to help get Sean Casey's family justice and to prevent him from abusing any other students again. This works, and Fletcher is forced to resign and picks up a new jazz conducting position in a more professional setting. When they serendipitously meet again at a jazz bar, Fletcher laments to Andrew about how he never got to produce the next Charlie Parker, which was the whole point of him teaching the way he did. In the arguable climax of the film, Andrew gets tricked by Fletcher to come perform in front of pro critics, but without knowing the music that's being played, eventually hoping to destroy Andrew's chances of ever becoming a drummer again. After a disastrous first set, Andrew walks off the stage in shame, but returns and delivers an awe-inspiring performance of Caravan and Whiplash that gives the movie its name. Now all this relates back to the story that Fletcher tells Andrew about Charlie Parker messing up during a cutting session and having Joe Jones, the conductor, throw a cymbal at his head. After Parker is humiliated, he returns next year and cements himself in history with one of the best saxophone pieces that's ever been played. We see the exact same chain of events happen here with Andrew. While the truth is that Fletcher probably just wanted to humiliate Andrew on stage for getting him fired, perhaps secondarily with the idea that he would return a year later to achieve greatness like Parker, once he sees Andrew return immediately and he starts playing again, he knows something different is going on here. Somewhere during the song, it becomes evident that something incredible is happening with the drum solo, and Fletcher changes his tone to encourage Andrew instead of berate him, proudly watching the birth of a legend. It's actually this scene which really sticks the landing for me on Fletcher's true character development. While other stereotypical villains want the spotlight and the credit for their achievements, Fletcher instead fades into the background here, menacingly. This shows how his role is in nurturing Andrew, not taking the achievement away from him. He has succeeded in producing the next Charlie Parker / Buddy Rich and doesn't need to actively participate in the glory of the moment. He simply steps back to allow Andrew to shine alone as he has achieved his life's goal and takes satisfaction in knowing that he was right. While Fletcher could have been just painted as a pure sadist, one who takes pleasure in manipulating and torturing his students and using greatness as an excuse, we see with this scene that that's not the case. He genuinely believes that musicians need to be pushed beyond what was expected of them in order to become great, and it is this conviction that makes him all the more evil by our standards. I guess the big question that the film asks us though is whether the ends justify the means here, and whether it's truly worth all the sacrifice and potential losses that happen along the way with this philosophy. The last approving nod from Fletcher and the gratified smile that Andrew puts on in the final scene really highlights the moral struggle that's going on here, something that could only happen with a multifaceted villain like Fletcher. Convictions, of course, can reveal themselves in several different ways. In many cases, this takes the form of innate evil qualities that the villains themselves represent. Take Calvin Candie from Django Unchained. Now, Django is a movie about the Deep South during the height of slavery, and Monsieur Candie is one of the largest plantation owners in Texas called Candyland. He coincidentally owns the slave Broomhilda, who is the wife of our main character, Django, a freed slave. The movie shows Django and the man who gives Django his freedom, Dr. King Schultz, as they slowly infiltrate the plantation under the guise of buying a fighting slave known as a Mandingo in order to get Broomhilda back. Side note, Christopher Waltz, who plays Schultz, actually plays an amazing villain in Inglourious Bastards, but I thought having two Tarantino / Waltz movies was a little overkill, so that's why we aren't talking about the absolutely chilling villain of Hans Landa here, but maybe in another video. Anyways, Candie is the main obstacle that Django and Schultz must overcome, representing the epitome of white bigoted America, and their attitude towards owning other humans as property. He genuinely believes that the white man is superior to the black man, and this makes him truly terrifying as a villain in the movie. Now this in itself gives a lot of connotation to the character of Calvin Candie, but the writers and actors do him even more justice in many ways. For example, when Django first shows up to Candyland, Django acts as if he is a black slaver, who is a consultant for Dr. Schultz buying a Mandingo. Candie is genuinely perplexed when hearing about this arrangement, as it never crossed his mind to think that a black man deserved to be free, let alone choose to enslave his own race. Through the opulence of his mansion to the massive number of slaves he owns, we see just how powerful and wealthy this man is. When he begins negotiating with Dr. Schultz, however, we get the first hints that Calvin Candie is not as indomitable as he appears. He puts on an air of sophistication, calling himself a Francophile in order to add a bit of foreign mystery as well as superiority over others, thus the name Monsieur Candie that he makes everyone call him. Observant viewers will quickly see through this facade, however, as through the conversations we see on screen, we know that he is in fact quite lacking in the brains department, knowing very little about the subjects and the people he tries to emulate. Several times, especially when matching wits with Dr. Schultz, we see he isn't learned in literature or verbose in vocabulary, such as a man like Dr. Schultz. I mean, not a lot of us are, but we also aren't really pretending to be either. Small examples are littered throughout every one of their interactions, like when Schultz cheers Candie for the drinks and he doesn't get it.
Prost. German.
The dinner scene where he doesn't know what the word panache means.
Panache.
Which ironically has roots leading back to French language. And his ignorance of the connection the name D'Artagnan has to the French book The Three Musketeers, and subsequent black identity of its author, Alexandre Dumas.
Soft-hearted Frenchie.
Alexandre Dumas is black.
And irony above ironies, he even mocks the slave D'Artagnan for not knowing what the word reimburse means after D'Artagnan is caught trying to escape. It all goes to show the hypocritical nature of his puffery, and the systemic problem that Calvin Candie is only one example of in this movie. Even more directly, we see his belief in phrenology come into play as the main piece of scientific evidence that Candie uses to back his racism. Phrenology is the quack science that falsely determined differences in black and white male skulls in order to justify why whites were the superior race, and that slaves were physiologically inferior. We know, of course, that this is utter malarkey, but Candie and his phrenology group show that racism to them is not a reason for their evilness, but a way of life that permeates every core of their character. His role personifies the profoundly rooted racism in America during this era, and all his unsavory character traits stem from this characteristic. This is the way to write a villain that's more than just a racist character. Candie treats racism like a matter of fact, turning what could have been just a plain evil belief into a profoundly distasteful villain. That's not the end of Django Unchained though. Oh no, we got a twofer. Don't think I forgot about the real evil in the movie, and it's not just the idea of racism. It's one level deeper than that, and it's represented by none other than the most cunning character in the movie by far, Old Man Stephen. Stephen is the true evil that hides behind the overt one that is Monsieur Candie. He represents the idea that slavery and racism is only one form of the evil that resides in this world. Its source, the idea that one man is greater than another man, and that someone is innately better simply by their birth or by their position. Now, Stephen is a slave in title, but in reality, he is the mastermind behind the workings of the plantation. But does he use his powers for good? Oh no. He falls into the same trap that white people fell into at the time, believing himself better than other slaves and above perhaps even the white folks. He lays low in the shadow of Calvin Candie though, smug in his position and treating the other slaves the same, if not more inhumanely than the other slavers. The true genius of the character of Stephen is not only in the juxtaposition against Calvin Candie, but also the mind game that Tarantino plays with us, where we fully expect Calvin Candie to be the end-all be-all villain of the movie, but secretly hides a second evil in plain sight. By focusing too hard on Candie, who was the obvious primary villain, we might have missed the subtle signs that it was actually Stephen who ran things at the plantation. Not only do the slaves only really move after Stephen repeats Candie's commands when they arrive at Candyland, but he also appears to be in charge of overseeing all the other slaves, both in the kitchen and out at dinner. He's even shown to be doing the paperwork in the back room, using a stamp to sign Calvin's signature instead of Calvin doing it himself. He hovers by Candie's right shoulder, symbolizing his role as Candie's right-hand man, but in reality, this position is also the perfect place to indicate that Candie is just Stephen's puppet, a figurehead that is easy to condemn in his place. Stephen is the first to notice a connection between Broomhilda and Django, ignoring Laura's initial comment, and susses out the real reason that Schultz and Django are at Candyland. Once the cat is out of the bag, he drops his fool for a man visage and talks to Candie almost like an equal in the study, pouring himself a nice glass of wine and talking without his typical subservient attitude. Especially once Candie is dead, he actually orders the remaining gunmen to stop shooting, and they listen, despite this meaning that the white men are taking orders from a black man. His monologue in the shed with Django hanging upside down after he's captured and tortured is truly terrifying. Like, look at this man's face. Samuel Jackson could give J.K. Simmons a run for his money. Like, geez, how many times do we need to change our pants? He's talking about how death is too easy an end for the crimes that Django has committed, and jump scares aside, the fact that he remains in power despite Calvin's death goes to show that no matter how many times we destroy the manifestations of evil, it's only a symptom of the true illness that would continue to rise up so long as humans believe that they are better than other humans, hiding deep in the darkness of human nature. Comparisons like these are only possible because they tackle large-seated problems in society and dive deep into the intricacies of what that looks like in a person or group of people. These are valuable ways for great characters to be born. Real quick, if you stuck around this long, consider dropping a sub. I love making videos about movies and games and just amazing stories in general, and if you do too, subbing's a great way to get notified as soon as the next video is out. Thank you so much for even watching this far, and I hope you enjoy the rest. Now back to the video. So of course, developing a good character often takes time, and sometimes you don't need to go that deep to get your point across. Sometimes all you need is a classic bad guy origin, someone who wants to be the most powerful being in the world, or is jealous of the hero for being prettier than them and vows to take them down. I obviously like three-dimensional characters, but I have no problem with stories that utilize the "I'm gonna take over the world" archetypal villain. However, to me, this kind of villain is often forgotten, and for good reason. There's usually not much more to say about them. Maybe they have some riveting backstory that justifies their villainous nature, but that's probably the most we can hope to get from villains like this, and many times writers don't even bother giving them sympathetic backgrounds either. This doesn't mean they're bad villains, just that they're only one note. Think Jafar from Aladdin or Syndrome from Incredibles 1. They're both great villains in the sense that they are good adversaries for their respective movies, but they don't represent much else besides inflated egos and a desire for power. Of course, there are quick ways to add some dimensionality to these characters, especially in subtle actions that show that they are rotten to the core. For example, one way to remove sympathy for villains like this is by making them choose a selfish or uncaring option in a critical situation, often juxtaposing that with the hero who chooses kindness and selflessness. In The Incredibles, Syndrome doesn't hesitate to blow up a plane he knows has children on board in this incredible scene. Not because he believes he must sacrifice the kids to get what he wants, but simply because he doesn't care. I, for one, as a kid, only really understood the true evil nature of Syndrome after this scene. This is a key difference between good and great, where villains that understand the emotional price they are paying, yet still choose to do so because they're stone-cold beliefs, are given much more weight than characters that don't think what they're doing is bad in the first place. The best villains are not just villains for the sake of being evil, they're torrid, gray area characters racked with divine purpose, driving them forward no matter the cost. Their real crime is often in taking their radical beliefs too far, and going beyond the limits of what any sane person would do in pursuit of these goals, as we already discussed with Whiplash and Django Unchained. These are the villains that stick in our minds years later, reminding us that it's not so simple to determine who's right and who is wrong. So let's talk about villains that think they are doing the right thing. Most villains definitely believe their own philosophy, but those results are usually for personal gain. What about villains who think they are the hero saving the world? Thanos from the Avengers movies is a perfect villain to represent this. He not only possesses strong ideals for how to save everyone, he's also the only one who could clash against the ideologies of all the heroes in the separate Marvel movies, and wasn't just a rule the world type of archetype that we often see in superhero movies. Every single hero in the Avengers was fighting to save lives, to protect the ones they loved. Thanos' plan stood in direct opposition to that, wanting to cut the universe's population in half in order to prevent overpopulation, which his home planet Titan fell victim to. This problem, one that we are led to believe could not be fixed by increasing food production or importing from extraterrestrial sources, was seemingly inevitable given the rate at which population was growing. Given their predicament, Thanos proposed that their population instead should be cut in half indiscriminately, lowering the demand in order to save the rest of the planet. The council was horrified and rejected the idea, casting Thanos out and earning him the title the Mad Titan. Sometime later, his predictions turned out to be true, and Titan was annihilated. This fueled his belief that only his plan could save others from the same fate, and by the end of Infinity War, he accomplished his noble mission by snapping away half of every living being everywhere. He was not indifferent to the impact this would have, however, and unlike Syndrome, knew it was a logical sacrifice that those remaining would benefit from, not just senseless killing. He didn't seek this power for selfish reasons like trying to take over the world or becoming some all-powerful being with the Infinity Stones. Instead, he wanted the stones to achieve what he believed was a righteous goal on a mass scale, to save the universe from self-destruction in a merciful way, and then put down his tools and rest in peace, knowing that he had saved the world. He didn't believe what he was doing was evil, only that he alone had the conviction to do what had to be done. This idea of balancing the universe might sound insane, given that he would be committing mass genocide, but you have to take into account how he came to this conclusion. Keep in mind, I'm only talking about the motivations we're given in the movies, not the comics. I'm talking to you, hardcore Marvel fans. Thanos represents the culmination of what I would consider one of the best multi-franchise villains that really did justice to the Marvel Phase 3 storylines. I honestly stopped keeping up with a lot of the films that came in Phase 4 and beyond, just because it felt like Endgame managed to tie up all the stories nicely and gave us a complex villain that was not just one and done like Ultron that didn't have any higher goals beyond the destruction of humanity. Obviously, I won't go through every story beat that Thanos was a part of, as unlike Fletcher and Candie, he had multiple films to flesh out his background and his motivations, but there are some scenes that called out specific aspects of his character in Infinity War and Endgame that I want to talk about specifically. To start, let's talk about the Soul Stone. In order to obtain the Soul Stone, one of the 6 Infinity Stones needed to allow Thanos' plan to work on a universal scale, one must sacrifice something that they truly loved as the cost of this power. At first, we think that this should be the ultimate safeguard, as a classic superhero villain would not love anything enough to be able to pay this price. However, when his adoptive daughter Gamora mocks Thanos for this very thing, we see that instead Thanos is shedding a tear over the fact that he knows exactly what must be done, and that he must sacrifice his own daughter to achieve this goal. Shocked, Gamora at first doesn't believe that this could be true, blind to the strict, stoic love that Thanos grew over the years, but as he throws her in the pit below and the Soul Stone rises in exchange, we see the absolute proof that he wasn't lying. Instead, we see now that his conviction and beliefs are so strong that he would even sacrifice his own daughter in order to spare others of that pain. Writing like this is some of my favorite ways to flip the script on the viewer's expectations, as it accomplishes so many things in a seemingly simple decision. Another small scene shows that Thanos respects others who hold the same strong will that he does. For example, when Peter Quill and Gamora, who are in love with each other, are tricked by Thanos and he captures Gamora so she could lead him to the Soul Stone. Gamora begs Peter to shoot her so the stone can be safe, but Quill is hesitant to do so. Thanos taunts Quill, but eventually, Peter does take the shot, knowing that the fate of the world and Gamora's wishes are greater than his own feelings. Thanos of course uses the Reality Stone to turn his bullets into harmless bubbles, but he comments that he likes Quill for being willing to, just like him, make the necessary sacrifice for what they believe is the greater good. This is as much a character scene for Quill as it is for Thanos and Gamora, but it really strikes home the point that the hardest choices require the strongest wills. Finally, when Thanos completes the snap that turns half the universe to dust, he is true to his word and retires to a farm on a distant planet rather than continue to use the stones for his own benefit, despite being the most powerful creature in the universe at this point and could literally do whatever they wanted now that the opposition has been defeated. Once again, Thanos is shown as a true believer of his ideals, and even when given that much power, doesn't give in to the temptations that come with it, and even destroys the stones into a form that could never be used again to undo his work or for anything else like it.
We use the stones to destroy the stones.
The consistency of his characterization and the strength of these convictions is the main reason why we feel truly justified in how big a villain Thanos was that the Avengers had to defeat, and the writers even had to grab an earlier, more battle-hungry version of Thanos from the past in order to give the heroes a fitting villain that they could defeat without any empathy, as this Thanos wants to annihilate every being in the universe without exception, taking the half for balance concept even further to show how wrong this could be. It's almost laughable how the only character worth being compared against Thanos was Thanos himself. But perhaps now it's even more obvious why this was the only way to propel the story of Endgame forward with a worthy villain with strong convictions like Thanos. It's important to note that just having a strong conviction doesn't make a great villain. How the writers take that conviction and use it as scaffolding to create a consistent, well thought out storyline is crucial to make sure that we don't create accidental narrative contradictions that would ruin the whole point of a villain such as this. And keep in mind, villains aren't the only ones who can have strong convictions and benefit character-wise from that. Every character in a story can follow this concept, especially side characters and sometimes the main characters. However, heroes in stories tend to have the opposite problem, where it's often the same conviction of being a hero and saving lives that really cause the problem of having the same kind of hero in every story, not that they're lacking conviction in the first place. But that's a story for another video. If you think I've missed any great examples of villains that were explored through the lens of a strong conviction, let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to see me cover any specific movies or characters, or even ones I've talked about briefly as examples from other videos, let me know about that too. I'm still on the lookout for ways to bring new formats and cool topics to the movies and games that I love so much, and I really want to hear from you guys what your thoughts are. Thank you as always for watching, and keep an eye out for more.